So I've been thinking for years and years, more than 30 years, the Civil War series that we did was broadcast in 1990, 33 years ago this week. And I had been thinking from the moment that was done that I wanted to do something on the period known as Reconstruction, a really misunderstood period. And over the years, as I've refined the idea of it, I wanted to back up to the beginning of emancipation, hence the title Emancipation. To Exodus refers to the great migration that took place over 6 decades between almost immediately, but particularly starting in the second decade of the 20th century and going on for 6 decades, called the Great Migration of African Americans out of the South to avoid to try to avoid the problems of Jim Crow. So it's been a pet project for a long time, and finally was able to assemble all the filmmakers that I needed to work with, that I wanted to work with: Erica Dilday, Sarah Burns, David McMahon, to get it done. Lafargue is interesting because I think, the past, when we do it right, we ask questions of it. We want to know how people lived. And his life is a remarkable arc. He's born in 1864, the next to the last year of the Civil War. He dies in 43, well into the beginning of the Great Migration. And his life tells us about the fact, as our faith tells us, that every human life is worthwhile. And this one has an interesting and pretty spectacular arc to it.
It's said that history is written by the winners in often case. What do you want to, quote, set the record straight about this period?
Well, I disagree with that. It's often attributed to Winston Churchill that the victors write the history. I think in the case of the period, the much misunderstood period called Reconstruction, is that in fact it wasn't written by the victors. It was written by others. And so it comes down to us. We inherit it in history books of the past and in popular culture like Birth of a Nation and Gone with the Wind as this incredibly bad period, when it was in fact an attempt to begin to try to figure out what equality looked like for everybody. And I think Lafargue takes us on a journey through that attempt to do that with, I think, pretty spectacular and persevering ways. And so I think that we tend to tell history from the top down rather than the bottom up. We try to do both and to understand it in that way. And I think his family story, his great granddaughter, and her attempting to come to is exactly the kind of history we want to have, in which every life has value, and that we begin to understand the larger forces of history from an intimate as well as a aerial point of view.
What is the significance of Peabody Magnet High School, the one he founded, um, still being in existence today?
It's just wonderful. It's our direct connection to the past. It's a portal. It's a window that permits us to go back and understand. Here are people, African American people, human beings, struggling to exist in a post-Reconstruction America in which Jim Crow is confining them at every point of view. And one of the things that suffers, of course, and has been suffering throughout the experience of Black people in America, is the question of education. So if a man who's going in with his wife and they're creating something that doesn't balance things out, doesn't make it an equal playing field, but at least gives children of color an opportunity to achieve. And the fact that it's still around is just one of those connections. And it allows us, too often our history is just filled with conventional wisdom and manipulations. Current politics, past politics tell us that it was this way or that way. And we've got to be really diligent, and we have to be responsible to find out what the facts are. And so we can, with this story, link the present with the past, and so continue this conversation we have. The smarter we are about the past, the more we know about the past, the better we are equipped to handle the problems of today, and of course, ensure that we have a future. The novelist Richard Powers said, the best arguments in the world, and of course, that's all we do today as Americans is argue. The best arguments in the world, he said, won't change a single person's point of view. The only thing that can do that is a good story. So we're hopefully in the good story business. That's what we want to tell. A big and complex story in 3 or 4 parts. We're not yet exactly sure. We're at the very beginning of the project that arcs from 1863, January 1st, when the Emancipation Proclamation Proclamation went into effect well into the beginning of the Great Migrations, whether it's the 20s or the 30s or the early 40s when John died. I don't know. But we want people to be able to understand the complexity and the dynamism of history. It's not one thing or the other. It's everybody's story. And in no way does the telling of new history limit somebody else's history. It's just pulling the lens back and showing a much wider and more complete story. And a wider and more complete story gives us a perspective that permits us to have a future. I'm just so excited that we're back in Louisiana and understanding it. It used to be that every single project I worked on, Huey Long, the Civil War, jazz, baseball, we were always in Louisiana, always traveling around from Shreveport and Monroeville and Monroe, and then down to New Orleans, of course, Alexandria, St. Martinsville, Baton Rouge. We've been all over, and the idea that we're going to be able to come back and back and back again is exciting, and hope the folks in Louisiana will put up with us. We're very excited, and I think the idea of telling a broad history and at the same time peopling it literally with folks that we know about, or folks that we've heard about, or stories that we think we know about, or signs we've passed said, the name of the school, and we're just driving past, and now we get to know a fuller story. That's the kind of history we're interested in. And they're for everybody too. That's the thing I want to say, that a lot of times documentaries are advocating for a particular point of view. We just want to tell a complete and complicated story, which invites everybody in and says, this is our story. I've said I make films about the US, but I also make films about us. All the intimacy of us and all the complexity and the majesty and the contradiction and even the controversy of the US. But it's a magnificent space to work in. And I've been privileged for almost 5 decades to be able to do that.